I majored in entrepreneurship when I was in college, and I've done a couple of startups since I graduated. So today we're going to be talking about funding colonization of Mars. So got a little bit of a background in that. In college, I also did internships in international trade and some private equity stuff. So know a little bit about finance. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but that's just so I can skirt questions, tell you to talk to someone else if you want to hammer me on something. Before we get to the how to fund colonization of Mars, I want to talk a little bit about why. We all have an answer to the question, why Mars? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But frankly, all of them have a common problem, and that is they're all high-minded. And when you're talking about a giant leap for mankind, you need mankind, and that includes people who think science is a four-letter word. So I think we need to kind of dumb it down for the general population. And that, I think, we can look back historically at why we colonized places. Columbus sailed the ocean blue for all the tea in China, not to stick a flag in some dirt and claim it for Spain. It was about money. And we went to the moon. Sorry, Dr. Zubrin, but it wasn't to show the world what free people can do. It was because we were in a pissing contest with the Soviet Union.
That's called showing the world what free people
Okay, I'll give you that. That's fair. But we didn't go back because there's frankly no economic motivation to go back, as far as I can tell. At least, if arguably there's some, but it's very limited. Mars, on the other hand, is different. We can colonize it, we can establish. Basically, when we go there, we are moving the market there. We will no longer have a global market, we will have an interplanetary one. It's not going to be the market here and the market there. It doesn't matter what the shipping costs are. You can do electronic transfer of anything nowadays. I've talked to someone who said, real estate's important on Mars because you can't transfer it from here to there, but you can Google REIT Japan, and you can buy Japanese real estate on your laptop right here. There's no limits on transfer from here to there. Technology is even more transferable. You can file a patent from anywhere in the world and anywhere else in the world. All you need is a computer and an email address for an attorney in whatever country you want to protect your intellectual property. So when we colonize Mars, we will have an interplanetary economy instead of a global economy, and that will benefit the economy on Earth locally. There'll be a big boom in anything related to finance. There's going to be a lot of activity there. There's going to be, in my opinion, the biggest one is going to be technological advances. That is going to be how our economy moves forward, given all of the automation that we are facing and all of the unemployment that's going to create. We're not going to deal with those issues by being defensive and trying to hold back the tide of progress. It's a matter of finding new ways to add value. And value is not something that's about money, it's about our values as humanity. That's where value comes from financially. So that's why. It's about jobs, it's about the economy, it's about development. And that's something that I think would be very helpful if we start explaining that to people who don't understand the high-minded reasons or who just don't care. And that's probably the majority of people. No matter what they'll tell you as far as, if you ask someone if we should go to Mars, they're going to say yes. If you ask them if you should increase their taxes to pay for it, they're going to say no. That's, everybody thinks it's great until you ask them to reach for their wallet, and then reality sets in. So now that we've kind of covered the why of it, let's talk about how. I don't want any government money. I think there's colonization from a market perspective, and there's imperial expansion from a state perspective. I think when we used to colonize places, we had a feudal society, so there was no separation between the market and the state. You had a king, he owned everything, he said whatever and did whatever, and that was, both of them wound up entirely. I think moving forward, colonization is going to be a market activity, not a state activity. So how are you going to pay for it? I would say start with the Constitution for the colony, write it yourself, include a provision for bonds, and have every colonist sign a copy of the Constitution so you have a literal social contract instead of a figurative social contract. Then you issue bonds, sell those to investors. What kind of investors would be investing in something like this? None of you. Sorry, but you guys don't have those kinds of pockets. I'm fairly sure I don't recognize anybody in here that I think would be a, kind of stand out if you're a Saudi prince, or I think I would recognize one of the people from CalPERS. Basically, you're talking about large-scale institutional investors. Things like Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, those are the modern-day equivalent of Ferdinand and Isabel, not President Obama. It's different. It's market-based. So you're talking about sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, endowments, some private wealth maybe, but you're talking about the wealthiest families, maybe the top, not even the top 100, maybe the top 10. Anything smaller than that, it just wouldn't be worth talking to for the amount of money that would be required for a minimum investment. And there was to give you an idea of scale there was a meeting some years ago of large-scale institutional investors. There were 250 of them in the room, and they had $30 trillion in assets under management. So about the same number. How many people are at the Mars Society convention this year? I want to say about 300? Yeah. So about as many people who are here, but with $30 trillion of assets at their disposal. So, and that's not the entirety of it. When you try to figure out how much they actually have in their entire, at their disposal, all large-scale institutional investors, it depends on who you ask. There's just too much. It's not money in the bank. It's assets. It's a different way of looking at things. So those are the kinds of investors you would deal with. So there's been some discussion about law at this conference, and my take on that is natural law. Basically, where does the 800-pound gorilla sit? Wherever it wants to. Yesterday I heard someone say possession's 9/10 of the law. Well, where the other 10th does not exist, it is the entirety of it. If I can hop on a rocket and go to Mars and stick a flag in it and say it's mine, you can come knock my flag down, or you can sit here and complain about it. But realistically, when you talk about even if the colonization of Mars were set in stone as illegal by the Outer Space Treaty, it would not matter, because enforcement of the Outer Space Treaty, I think, would probably fall to the UN Security Council. And if we're talking about benefits to the economy, the U.S. has a veto on the UN Security Council. So there is no, as far as I'm concerned, there's no realistic legal impediment to colonization. Beyond having to get some really good lawyers in order to do it. But that's just a matter of, taking care of the paperwork, getting, wealthy lawyers to agree that it's legal, and argue with people who say it's not, and all of that. But, reality is reality as far as I'm concerned on that. So now that we've kind of covered how to do it, and we've also mentioned that none of us can do it unless somebody snuck in who's a large-scale institutional investor, and I'm not aware of them. What can be done to move forward with that? I would say the two things mainly. One, we're in DC. You can lobby your congressional representatives. Basically, just bug the crap out of them. Call them. That's You know, if there is the benefit that comes from NASA as far as tech development and all those sorts of things, proving the feasibility and scalability of the technologies involved, that would be helpful. But yeah, I don't expect NASA to be able to do it long term. I just don't see the political support there to fund it through a state-backed thing, at least not any time between now and when China gets serious about doing so. But you can lobby them. You can also raise awareness generally with social media. That is something, as far as I'm concerned, the internet is kind of like society's thinking cap if the computer is a bicycle for the brain. If you let people know, yeah, it's doable. It's gonna, as I said, dumb it down for the people who think science is a four-letter word. Explain to them that it's good for the economy here and that it means jobs, and that will be helpful. But unfortunately, that is about all we can do unless somebody knows Elon Musk or someone like that. And yeah, we can take questions now. I've
Sure.
pretty well covered everything.
I'm curious why you think government bonds are preferable to equity. If it were my money, I think I would prefer the latter rather than.
Well, I think actually equity. I think I skipped over that, but there's really three ways to fund about anything. There's debt, there's equity, and there's other. Other has limited applicability. I would say Elon Musk's approach of selling tickets to Mars for $500,000 apiece is kind of like selling an equity stake in a Mars colony. You're not talking about a business that's going to be publicly traded. You're talking about a colony. So I would say an equity stake in it would be citizenship. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not an either or. I would say do both. $500,000 apiece is great.
Describe one.
Yeah, half a million apiece is great for the people that can afford it. But I think one of the reasons Jamestown failed was because they sent a bunch of rich guys who were kind of useless when you put them in the wilderness. And you're going to need a NASA engineer to fix the toilet and stuff like that whenever you're sending a habitat from Earth to Mars. But whenever you're building them there, you want a plumber. And most plumbers don't have $500,000 to fly to Mars. So I would say both. It's all the above board, all of it. Just it's not a only go this way. It's something that hasn't been covered yet, at least not to my knowledge. So, yeah.
Quick comment. If you're the only plumber on Mars, you can charge for weekly rates.
That is true.
But I guess, with your sovereign wealth funds and private equity, what exactly are they investing in if they invest in a bond?
The same thing they would.
Is the return, or what is the product of Mars?
That would, the government that you would establish on Mars by writing this Constitution, they would charge taxes the same as any government would, and they would make payments on their government's bonds the same as any government does for the same reasons that the U.S. does, for instance. It'd be, the same as a U.S. Treasury bill, basically. Yeah.
How many people on Mars do you envision writing the Constitution and declaring independence?
None. I would do it before any of them went. Actually, I would commission a constitution from constitutional lawyers here. As far as we can get into all kinds of debates on that, but I would say it's important to leave Earth politics out of it to make it as bare bones as possible. It doesn't really matter what we think as far as oxygen, whether it's a human right or a property right, unless we go there and want to debate it there. Because if they disagree with us, they're just going to throw the Constitution out and start over. And that typically causes problems when governments do that. You usually end up with some strong man who tries to insulate himself and create power. That sort. It causes all kinds of problems. Yeah.
A lot of universities have endowments literally in the billions.
Yeah.
Could you see them endowing a chair or a seat for an outstanding geologist to be sent to Mars for a 2-year say you've got 10 of those people, or 10 such endowments, you've probably got a couple of $1 million each right there.
Yeah, that'd be
And they're doing this
possible.
for the publicity. Harvard probably has an endowment in the billions. I forget, I remember reading it. It's a
Yeah, it's in the billions.
fantastic sum.
Yeah.
And there are many universities in similar situations. It seems like, even the university we're sitting in looks pretty rich to me.
Yeah, endowments, university endowments are another large-scale institutional investor. So they're similar to pension funds and all that.
It seems to me you've designed a self-defeating scenario. You said that the sovereign wealth funds are the only people who can do this, but the sovereign wealth funds are some of the most risk-averse investment bodies in the entire world. They do really only things that are absolutely guaranteed, and you're talking about what to them would be a very speculative venture. How do you propose to bring the rating of your bond into something that would be a reasonable investment for such a conservative investor?
Well, two things. One, it wasn't only sovereign wealth funds, but only large-scale institutional investors. So sovereign wealth funds would be one, pension funds, insurance companies, endowments and stuff. Second thing is, no, they're not. They may be generally risk-averse, the same as any investor is, but they invest in venture capital funds as well. And venture capital's business model is basically you invest in 10 companies, 9 of them are dog crap, but one of them makes billions and pays for the other dog crap. So that's how their business model functions. So
the VC model is a very small investment. When you're talking about going to Mars, you're talking about billions of dollars investment. It's dramatically different scale. Because I have a cousin who's a VC.
it is a much larger scale than any individual venture capital sort of thing would be, but I think you're still talking about a relatively small proportion of their fund. You're also not talking about a typical government bond like a U.S. Treasury bill. You're talking about alternative investment that's going to be a very small amount of their entire portfolio, and it's going to be a long-term investment. It's not going to be something that they can turn around and flip, 6 months later. It's not that that's not their way of investing anyways, but I think we just disagree about whether or not that's going to be a problem, but none of them are here, so we can't ask them. We're just going to have to agree to disagree, I think. Yeah.
How would you go about enforcing the collection of taxes?
I wouldn't. They would. That's how do we enforce collection of taxes here? If you're a Chinese investor in a U.S. government bond, how do you enforce the U.S. government to pay for it? You don't. We pay our bills because we want to continue to go back and borrow more money. That's the reality of it.
Yeah. On Mars, if you're relying on resupply missions, so you have a very strong incentive to
Short term, yes,
Yeah.
but I think long term that might cause some, kind of animosity. Yeah.
Did you think about IRA funds? The reason
No.
is- Okay. So it's like people have to do IRA,
Yeah, but it has to do with.
especially if they're going to end up having family members or themselves personally relying to give up their IRA funds. And
Yeah, but the issue there, I think, is not the volume of money so much as who you would have to go to for access to that. For something like CalPERS is a really large pension fund. It's one of the largest. It's got an excellent reputation. It's California Public Employees Retirement System, I think. So they've got a board that you can go to and pitch investments to. Whereas if you're talking about IRAs, just in general, I don't know much about that. I think IRAs typically are things like publicly traded stocks and equities, and that would I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were securities regulations related to like preventing you from doing.
there are, but the individual can sign up their IRA to do anything they want. You see, the way the SEC, which I know because we've done this, you cannot solicit from them, but the person can approach you and give up their IRA. Or they can lean against it or loan against it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I'd just go after large scale institutional investors. I think they're serious. They're the ones that would yeah.
Two comments. I mean, the reason that bonds are attractive for the person borrowing the money is that they have a lower yield. The reason they have a lower yield is the equity is underneath. The equity is risky. The bondholder gets paid out first, even if the equity holder may take a bath and lose all his money.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the Mars financing, I'm not sure how that would work unless you have another layer of equity investment that absorbs the risk so that the bond is safer. The second thing is bonds typically, you see a maturity of not more than 30 years. If you look at the history of colonization on Earth, most colonies, if they ever became cash flow positive for the parent country that colonized those places, took much longer, with the exception of the Spanish colonies in the New World, because they immediately shipped back huge amounts of gold and silver. Unless we find something like that on Mars that has a very high value on Earth and is economical to bring back, it's hard for me to see how within the time frame of a normal private investor who doesn't do this out of a idealism like Elon Musk does, I think,
Yeah.
how the investment equation would pencil out that you can just go on the New York Stock Exchange and you can sell bonds because people say, yeah, this is better than buying bonds in GE or than making an investment in the next clean energy technology on Earth.
Okay. Well, governments don't issue equity unless you're talking about citizenship, at least to my knowledge, and most governments issue bonds, if not all governments. So I don't really, I'm not sure if there's a question there, just a disagreement.
Well, the question is,
or
what's the guaranteed revenue stream? Governments that can issue bonds are governments,
Mhm.
established governments,
Yeah.
like the United States, there's a budget. Investors know how much
Well,
taxes
the-
we take in,
yeah.
and we have a percentage of that we
Once-
pay out as interest.
Once you,
But the
when,
Martian government doesn't have that yet.
not yet, no. Not until they're there. When they're there, once you put people there, you're going to have an economy there. When you have an economy and a government, you have taxes. And when you have taxes and bonds that are due, you pay the debts on your bonds. One of the things I would propose doing, I avoided specifically getting into the nitty-gritty issues of deal structure, but one of the things I would like to do if I were involved in putting something like this together would be to tie the performance of the bonds to the performance of the colony's economy. That way, it would be a situation more like the U.S. government's where you can control your currency and never default on your debt, as opposed to the situation in Greece and their bond payments where they don't control their currency. And currency fluctuations, they used to have an economy that could support their debt payments, and now they don't. There's not much point in getting into deal structure unless we have actual numbers that are based on best estimates, and I'm not in a position to bother putting those together. Did you have?
Well, I was just thinking, there certainly are examples from the age of exploration of corporations that acted very much like governments, and
Yeah.
that often had both equity and debt in their financial structure, and you might think of that as a possible.
Yeah, That might be a possibility. I'm personally averse to it. I feel like there should be that there's state functions and there's market functions, and whenever you kind of commingle the two, you end up with issues. Same as church and state. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It has been done. There's East India Tea Company was practically speaking a country, functionally, if not in law. The Jamestown, I think, was done as a for-profit company. It was like Virginia Company or Virginia something company. But yeah, it's a possibility. Yeah.
What kind of economic and political relations would you want to set up or expect to set up with other colonies that would certainly be set up on Mars before you're there if your plane succeeds? Have you considered that? Have you talked about it? Thought about it?
I'd leave that up to the people that were there. I just, there would be, I think, I suspect there'll be one colony initially, and after that there will be other ones that buy their supplies from the initial colony, because that's a heck of a lot cheaper than sending stuff from. But that I don't have any kind of input on that. I'd say leave that up to the Martians. I'm not personally plan on going there. I'd love to, but we'll see how that turns out.
What about mining return?
What about what?
What mining return? Sending your colony there to specifically exploit a resource, I'm thinking opal or silica on Mars.
I think the shipping costs would be prohibitive for any kind of physical trade. I think the big, ones and zeros are a heck of a lot less expensive to send back and forth than any kind of material we could mine. So I think the big deal there, I think, is the technology that's going to be developed. All the equity in Silicon Valley is worth more today than all the tea in China was when Columbus headed for the Indies. We just kind of got in the way.
The admiral of the oceans.
Yeah. Well, either way, yeah.
You said that it's very expensive to make something come back from Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the most exchangeable thing between Earth and Mars is data. Why don't you imagine, for example, TV program or documentaries to fund your credit?
I'm all for. That would be kind of the other category of finance. That's Mars One's approach is what it sounds like you're talking about. And I'd say that's kind of, it's called bootstrapping, basically funding some economic activity out of revenue, out of sales. I don't think something like this, if I was going to set it up, it wouldn't be a matter of doing everything. It would be a matter of, great, you're a producer, you're a camera crew, whatever. Make a reality TV show, make a bunch of money doing it, and we'll charge you taxes, and that'll go in to it the same as any other kind of economic activity. So, yeah.
Okay. I tend to agree with one of the questioners who pointed out that venture money was small, sovereign wealth money was conservative. Silicon Valley mad money, on the other hand, is adventurous and potentially large. And to me, and I agree with you when you say that ones and zeros are easy to transport across interplanetary space. So why wouldn't the model be to get Silicon Valley kind of money to put a colony on Mars in order to have a group of technologically adept people together and isolated, in a sense, in a location where they're forced to innovate and free to innovate, and they can make inventions for their own purposes, but which can be licensed on Earth and make money?
That's, as far as the second part, as far as where you get, Silicon Valley type of people doing inventions and stuff like that.
The source of wealth
That's,
is innovation,
yeah.
not natural resources.
Yeah, I would agree with you entirely on the second point. That's what I was talking about as far as the technology that's going to be developed there being the most valuable aspect of it from my perspective. As far as Silicon Valley money.
Silicon Valley type.
Yeah, well, where Silicon Valley money comes from are large-scale institutional investors, but it's a small percentage of their portfolio.
People like Pete Thiel, for example,
Yeah,
who have seen
I wouldn't turn
billions of dollars
I wouldn't turn him down.
created out of nothing through brain power.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule Thiel out for an investor in something as an investor for something like this. For other things, I probably would, but that's nothing to do with Mars stuff. That has to do with other things. But yeah, I wouldn't turn them down. I don't think they have deep enough pockets, frankly. Thiel's only got maybe $5 billion roundabouts,
Google,
give or take a few.
Brain,
Still,
Page,
they don't have the same kind of personal wealth. Just doesn't have the same kind of resources as something like CalPERS or Norway's sovereign wealth fund. So when you talk about the percentage of their portfolio that an investment in something like this would be, it would be a very significant investment for someone like Peter Thiel, whereas for someone like CalPERS or Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, it would be a relatively small percentage.
I want to jump in real quickly. We are at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
However, I've gotten a note that Art Harmon is running a little late. So if you're here for his speech, you're welcome to stay. But I would, say if you want to go for another 5 minutes or so.
Okay, we'll just keep doing
that's-
questions. Yeah.
To put your two thoughts together, I mean, what you could do is, while it's true that personal wealth is smaller than sovereign wealth funds, maybe the way you get the sovereign wealth funds to get interested is
By having some of them on board?
Well,
Yeah.
and by having different tranches of financing,
Yeah.
more risk on some of the more visionary individual investors.
Yeah.
And, a little bit less on the sovereign.
I don't disagree with any of that. When we start getting into deal structure issues, it's just one of those things where it's too much spitballing. It's too far, too unrelated to any kind of realistic conversation at this point. If I were doing this in front of a bunch of potential investors, I would put together hard numbers and do all that sort of thing, which I haven't done for this, obviously. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's only sovereign wealth funds. I would just say those would be the ones that I personally would go after, would be sovereign wealth funds and insurance companies, endowments, the biggest investors on earth, basically. Yeah.
I have an old IBM 300 server. We can strap a radio on it, put on a $50 million Elon Musk flight to Mars, and we will have, voila, the information economy on the surface of Mars. And you will not be able to get the money extracted from that economy because you don't really have an economy. Without mining, without farming, without people there to construct things and do things that are useful, without physical transfers of goods and equipment, you haven't really created anything for the wealth to be constructed.
Locally, yes, those things are all critical. But as far as farming on Mars and shipping that back to Earth, I would say that's a pipe dream. But yeah, you're correct about
For the Martians, if they
exactly.
don't have food to eat, they're not going to be Martians for very long.
Yes, I don't disagree with that in any way. I don't think if I said anything that contradicted that, I apologize. I misspoke. But obviously, you're going to have physical economic activity on the surface of Mars. But I think as far as
transfer economies.
Okay, gentlemen, we're
Yeah.
we're out of time.
Sorry.
So,
We can talk about it later.
Sorry.